The scariest people never look dangerous. That's the part nobody tells you when you leave home for the first time. Nobody warns you about the ordinary men with soft smiles and tired eyes. The kind who wear faded sweaters and apologize too much. The kind who help elderly women load groceries into their trunks and wave politely at neighbors every Sunday morning. We grow up afraid of monsters that announce themselves. Dark streets. Masked strangers. Men who look evil before they speak. But real predators understand something terrifying about human nature. People trust what feels familiar. A clean kitchen. Family photos on the wall. The smell of coffee brewing in the evening. A middle-class house with flower pots near the porch. That's what makes it easy. Because when danger looks normal, your instincts arrive too late. And by the time you realize something is wrong, the door has already closed behind you. I still remember the exact sound my suitcase wheels made when Thomas carried them up the front steps of his house. A dull plastic scraping against wet concrete. It had been raining when I landed, and the cold English air clung to my skin through my sweater. I was exhausted from almost 20 hours of traveling. My body felt heavy, jet-lagged, disconnected from reality. But underneath the exhaustion was excitement. Real excitement. I had made it. After years of my parents saving every extra dollar they could. After my mother secretly skipping meals so I could afford textbooks and visa fees. After my father working double shifts until his hands permanently smelled like machine oil. I was finally abroad. I remember standing there in front of that modest suburban house thinking, this is the beginning of my real life. The neighborhood looked painfully ordinary. Small brick houses lined the street in perfect rows. Tiny lawns, parked bicycles. Warm yellow lights glowing through curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before everything became quiet again. Thomas looked exactly like the kind of man you'd trust immediately. Late 40s maybe. Slightly overweight. Tired eyes behind rectangular glasses. The kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. Nothing about him stood out. He wore a dark green sweater with coffee stains near the sleeve and kept speaking in this gentle, apologetic tone. Sorry about the mess, he said while unlocking the front door. Sarah usually keeps the place nicer than this. His wife appeared in the hallway behind him. Sarah. She was thin, very thin. Not unhealthy looking exactly. Just drained somehow, like life had slowly been pulling pieces out of her for years. She smiled at me politely, but it never reached her eyes. Welcome, Lily, she said softly. Her voice barely filled the room. I remember noticing how quiet the house was. Not peaceful quiet, heavy quiet, like everyone inside had learned not to make unnecessary noise. Still, I ignored the feeling immediately, because why wouldn't I? The house looked normal. There were framed family photos on the walls, a bowl of fruit in the kitchen, magnets on the refrigerator from different cities around Europe. The television hummed softly somewhere in the background, while rain tapped gently against the windows. Ordinary, safe. Thomas carried my suitcase upstairs and showed me my room. It's small, he said with an embarrassed laugh, but hopefully comfortable enough until you settle in. The room really was small. A single bed, a wooden desk, cream-colored curtains, a lamp with a flickering bulb, but to me it felt like freedom. I remember touching the desk with my fingertips and imagining myself studying there late at night. Building a future, making my parents proud. I nearly cried from gratitude. Thomas stood near the doorway while I unpacked a few things. You must be starving, he said. Sarah made soup. We ate together at the kitchen table. Tomato soup and toasted bread. Simple, warm, normal. Thomas talked most of the time, explaining bus routes, university paperwork, local grocery stores. Sarah stayed mostly silent beside him, occasionally nodding or forcing a faint smile. At one point, I caught her staring at me for a second too long. Not rudely, just strangely, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I looked away first. The clock above the stove ticked loudly during the quiet moments. Tick, tick, tick. After dinner, I helped carry bowls to the sink even though Sarah insisted I didn't need to. You're our guest, Thomas said kindly. Guest. That word comforts you when you're young. It makes you believe you're protected. Later that night, I finally sat on the edge of my bed, exhausted beyond words. My parents had texted me 3 times asking if I arrived safely. I sent them photos of the room. Mom instantly replied with heart emojis. Dad said, proud of you, kiddo. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. For a moment, everything felt worth it. Then there was a knock on the bedroom door. Thomas, sorry to bother you this late, he said gently. Just one small thing. He stood there holding a folder against his chest. The local exchange program and housing council need a physical verification, registry by tomorrow morning, he explained casually. It's a standard process for international students staying with host families. I frowned slightly. Oh, they need your passport details logged officially, he continued. Honestly, the system here is a nightmare. Too much paperwork. He chuckled like an exhausted middle-aged man annoyed with bureaucracy. Completely believable. I'll lock it in my home office desk tonight so nothing gets misplaced, he added. You'll get it back tomorrow afternoon. There was not a single alarm bell in my head. Why would there be? The man lived in a tiny suburban house with his quiet wife and soup simmering on the stove. He looked safer than some of my own relatives, so I reached into my backpack and handed him my passport without hesitation. Without fear, without thought. Thomas smiled warmly. Thank you, Lily. Then he walked downstairs with it. And that's when I saw Sarah. She was standing near the bottom of the staircase in complete silence. Just watching me, her expression had changed completely. The politeness was gone. So was the fake smile. What remained in her eyes was something far worse. Pity. Deep, hollow pity. The kind you give someone when you already know what's about to happen to them. A cold sensation crawled slowly across my skin. Thomas disappeared down the hallway with my passport in his hand. A door opened somewhere downstairs, then locked, and suddenly the house didn't feel ordinary anymore. It felt airtight, soundproof, like something enormous had just sealed shut around me, like a vault closing. I asked for my passport back on the 4th day. Not aggressively, not suspiciously, just casually, the way any normal person would. We were standing in the kitchen that morning while weak. Sunlight pushed through the curtains in pale, gray strips. Sarah was washing dishes silently, her movements slow and mechanical. Thomas stood near the coffee machine reading something on his phone. I tried to sound relaxed. Hey, Thomas, could I get my passport back today? I need to finish some university paperwork. He didn't even look up immediately. Just took another sip of coffee first. Then he smiled. Calm, patient, reasonable. The registration office is slow, Lily, he said. In this country, bureaucracy takes weeks. Trust me, it's safer in my desk than in your backpack. Something about the sentence bothered me instantly. Not the words themselves, the certainty. Like the conversation was already over before I had a chance to respond. Oh, I said quietly. You don't want to lose it, he continued casually. If that passport disappears, replacing it will become a nightmare. Then he laughed softly. And believe me, the government offices here love making immigrants suffer. Sarah kept scrubbing the same plate long after it was already clean. I noticed her shoulders tense slightly. That should have been enough. It should have been enough for me to understand something was wrong. But fear doesn't arrive all at once. It leaks into your life slowly. At first, you explain everything away because the alternative is too frightening to consider. So I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe this really was normal. Maybe I was being paranoid in a foreign country, where I didn't understand the system yet. That became my routine, convincing myself my instincts were dramatic. Every uncomfortable moment came wrapped in just enough normalcy to confuse me. That was Thomas's real talent, not intimidation, confusion. One evening, about a week later, I was getting ready to leave for orientation at the university campus. The weather had turned colder, and I stood in the hallway struggling with the zipper of my jacket while checking directions on my phone. Thomas appeared beside me suddenly. Hold still, he said. Before I could react, his hands reached toward my collar. At first, it seemed harmless. Fatherly, even. He adjusted the fabric near my neck like he was fixing it for me. You'll freeze outside dressed like this, he murmured. But then his fingers lingered. Too long. His knuckles brushed slowly against the side of my throat. Not accidental, not quick, slow enough for my stomach to tighten. I froze instantly. I could feel the rough texture of his skin against my collarbone, the warmth of his breath near my forehead, the faint smell of cheap aftershave mixed with coffee. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. Airless. There, he whispered softly. Much better. But his hand didn't move away immediately. It stayed there for another second. 2 seconds, his thumb resting lightly near the base of my throat. Something cold spread through my chest. I stepped backward so fast my shoulder hit the wall. Thomas blinked at me innocently. What? He said with a small laugh. I forced myself to smile. Nothing. You're very jumpy, Lily. The way he said my name made my skin crawl. I left the house shaking. Outside, the cold air hit my face hard enough to hurt. But somehow that felt better than being inside. I remember sitting on the bus replaying the moment again and again in my head. Maybe it really was innocent. Maybe cultural differences existed. Maybe I was embarrassing myself by interpreting kindness as something ugly. That's how gaslighting works. Not by forcing lies into your head, By making you distrust your own body. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your stomach tightens. Your heartbeat changes. Your muscles lock. But if someone calmly explains away your fear enough times, eventually you start arguing against yourself. And I did. Constantly. A few nights later, Thomas decided to teach me how to use the home security system. It's important, he said during dinner. This neighborhood looks safe, but break-ins happen. Sarah went completely silent after he said that. Her spoon stopped moving. I noticed it, but again I ignored it. Thomas led me into the hallway, where a small digital keypad was mounted beside the front door. Come here, he said. I stepped closer. Type the code. I reached toward the keypad, but before my fingers touched it, he moved behind me. Directly behind me. Too close. My entire body stiffened instantly. I could feel the heat from his chest pressing lightly against my back. Then his hand covered mine. Large, cold, heavy. Like this, he whispered. His fingers wrapped around my hand completely, guiding it toward the numbers. I stopped breathing for a second. The smell of his aftershave surrounded me immediately, sharp and chemical, mixed with laundry detergent and something sour underneath. My pulse hammered violently in my throat. There, he murmured near my ear. You press firmly. His grip tightened suddenly. Painfully. Not enough to leave bruises. Just enough to establish control. I tried pulling my hand away gently. He squeezed harder. My stomach dropped. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move. But I didn't know how to react without making everything worse. I felt trapped inside my own politeness. That's the alarm reset, he continued calmly. His mouth so close to my ear I could feel warmth against my skin. And this one locks all exterior doors. His chest pressed harder against my back as he leaned forward. The hallway felt suffocating. No air, no sound. Just the electronic beeping of the keypad and the thunder of my heartbeat. When he finally released my hand, my palm was damp with sweat. I stepped away immediately, too quickly. Thomas smiled faintly. You're nervous again. I'm just tired, I muttered. He tilted his head slightly. You know, he said softly, you don't have to act afraid around us. We treat exchange students like family here. Family. That word started sounding dangerous inside that house. At dinner, things became worse in smaller ways. Subtle ways. Thomas began sitting closer and closer to me every night. At first, it was only shoulder contact on the couch, then knees touching under the dinner table, then his thigh pressing firmly against mine while watching television. Always accidental enough to deny, always intentional enough to feel. One night, I shifted slightly away from him on the couch without thinking. Immediately, his hand landed on my lower back. Heavy, possessive. He pulled me gently closer again while laughing at something on TV. Don't sit all the way over there, he joked. Makes us look unfriendly. Sarah stared at the television without blinking. I felt physically sick. Every muscle in my body stayed tense constantly now. I started spending longer hours outside, just to avoid going home. Libraries, coffee shops, campus benches, anywhere. But eventually I always had to return, because I had nowhere else to go. My parents had spent nearly everything sending me abroad. I couldn't afford hotels, I couldn't afford emergency housing, and without my passport, I couldn't even prove my identity properly. That realization terrified me more every day. Then the Wi-Fi stopped working. At least that's what Thomas claimed. I changed the router settings, he said one evening while washing dishes. Too many network issues lately. I stared at him. My phone can't connect anymore. You don't need to be glued to your screen every second anyway, he replied casually. A local student should focus on experiencing her environment. I tried using mobile data afterward. Weak signal. Barely usable inside the house. Messages stopped sending properly. Calls dropped constantly. Isolation settled over me slowly after that. The silence inside the house became unbearable. No music, no conversations, no television most nights. Just clocks ticking, pipes groaning softly behind walls, floorboards creaking upstairs, and Sarah moving around like a ghost. Then came the moment that finally shattered whatever denial I still had left. Thomas had gone out to buy groceries. For once, the house felt lighter without him there. I stood alone in the kitchen, pouring myself water when Sarah walked in quietly. She looked exhausted. Not physically, spiritually, like someone who had been drowning for years. She opened a cabinet slowly, then stopped beside me without looking directly at me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then, in the smallest voice imaginable, she whispered, "He used to tell me I was like a daughter, too." Every hair on my body stood up instantly. I turned toward her. Sarah's eyes looked wet, terrified, broken. Before I could respond, she finally looked at me directly. and what I saw in her expression destroyed the last piece of safety I still felt inside that house. "Don't eat the food he cooks tonight," she whispered. Then she walked away before I could say a single word. I didn't eat dinner that night. I pretended to. I moved the food around my plate while Thomas talked casually about traffic and grocery prices like he was the most ordinary man in the world. Meanwhile, Sarah sat across from me in complete silence. She never looked directly at me again after her warning in the kitchen. But she didn't need to. The fear in her voice had already rooted itself deep inside my chest. "Don't eat the food he cooks tonight." That sentence kept repeating in my head over and over while Thomas smiled at me from the other side of the table. I kept wondering how many other girls had sat exactly where I was sitting. How many of them ignored the warning signs too? How many of them disappeared quietly afterward? The thought made me physically nauseous. Around 10:30, Thomas grabbed his coat from the hallway hook. "Late shift tonight," he announced casually. "Warehouse inventory problem." I nodded carefully. "Okay." He paused near me before leaving. His hand brushed slowly across my shoulder. "You should sleep early," he said softly. "Big day tomorrow." Tomorrow. The way he said it made my stomach twist violently. Then he left. The front door shut. A few seconds later, I heard his car pull away from the driveway. Silence swallowed the house immediately. Not peaceful silence, dead silence. The kind that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I waited almost 20 minutes before moving. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone twice. Every instinct in my body screamed that I should run. But run where? I still didn't have my passport. I barely had money. And deep down, I already knew something much worse than harassment was happening inside that house. I needed proof. I needed my documents. I needed to know exactly who Thomas really was. The hallway floor creaked under my feet as I moved toward his office. Even the darkness inside the house felt different at night. More hostile. The office door stood slightly open. I froze outside it for several seconds, listening carefully. Nothing. Slowly, I pushed the door open wider. The room smelled like paper, dust, and stale coffee. Thomas's desk lamp cast a weak yellow glow across shelves packed with folders and binders. The curtains were closed tightly. A small printer hummed quietly in one corner. At first glance, everything looked painfully normal. Bills, tax documents, office supplies. The setup of a boring middle-aged man. But my heartbeat kept getting faster anyway. I moved toward the desk carefully and pulled open the top drawer. Pens, receipts, nothing. Second drawer, empty folders, sticky notes. Third drawer, locked. My stomach dropped instantly. I crouched lower beside the desk, panic starting to rise in my throat. Think. Then I remembered watching Thomas earlier that week. He always touched the underside of the desk before opening the drawer. My fingers searched beneath the wood and found tape, a small key. Cold dread spread through my entire body. My hands shook violently while unlocking the drawer. Inside was a stack of passports, at least 7. Different countries, different faces, different names. For a second, my brain genuinely stopped processing what I was seeing. Then I found mine. My passport sat near the bottom beneath a thin black notebook. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried immediately. But then I noticed the notebook. Something inside me whispered, "Don't open it." I opened it anyway. At first, the pages made no sense. Dates, airports, amounts of money. Then I saw the names beside prices. Female, age 20, transfer confirmed. Another page. Transit arranged. Client approved. My blood turned to ice. I flipped faster. Paris, Berlin, Dubai. Different flight numbers, different names, different payments. Some names had red lines through them. Others had notes beside them. Compliant, difficult, sedated. I couldn't breathe anymore. The room tilted violently around me. My vision blurred as panic flooded my body so hard my knees nearly gave out underneath me. No. My mind refused to connect the dots even while my body already understood. Thomas wasn't just controlling. He wasn't just abusive. He wasn't just creepy. He was selling girls. Selling them? I dropped the notebook accidentally. The sound against the floor made me jump so hard I almost screamed. Then I saw the second phone, a cheap burner phone hidden beneath the ledger. The screen lit up when I touched it. Messages, dozens of them. I opened the most recent conversation. Arrival tomorrow confirmed? Yes. Young, no local contacts. Documents secured. Another message. Client requested updated photos first. Then another. Transport pickup Thursday night. I stopped breathing completely. Thursday night. Tomorrow. My hands went numb. I opened the photo folder with shaking fingers and saw myself. Photos of me inside the house. At dinner, in the hallway, one from outside my bedroom door. I felt something inside me collapse completely. A sound escaped my throat that barely sounded human. Not a scream, something smaller, more broken. My entire body started shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't think anymore. All I could picture was my mother hugging me goodbye at the airport. My father telling me to study hard and stay safe. They sacrificed everything to send me here, and I had walked directly into the hands of a trafficker. I suddenly understood Sarah's face. The pity, the silence, the fear. Tears blurred my vision instantly. I grabbed my passport desperately and turned toward the door. And froze. Sarah stood there. For one horrifying second, pure panic exploded inside me. I thought she was going to scream for Thomas. Thought she would trap me, expose me. But then I saw her face. She was crying. Not quietly, not elegantly. Her entire expression looked shattered. She closed the office door behind her softly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I backed away immediately, clutching my passport against my chest. "You knew?" My voice cracked violently. "You knew this whole time?" Sarah started shaking her head immediately. "I tried to warn you. You let him bring me here." Her face crumpled like I had physically struck her. "I know." The pain in her voice stopped me cold. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Sarah slowly sat down beside the desk like her legs could no longer hold her up. And suddenly she looked older than I had ever realized. Not old physically, destroyed old. "He told me I was special too," she whispered. I stared at her silently, her eyes filled with tears again. 10 years ago, she said weakly. "I came here from Romania as an exchange student." Every word made my stomach sink deeper. He took my passport the first night. The room felt colder with every sentence. At first he was kind, patient, protective. Her voice trembled violently. Then little things started changing. Isolation, control, touching, threats. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. He told me nobody would believe me because I was foreign, she whispered. And after enough time, I started believing him. Tears rolled down her face slowly. He hurt me until I stopped fighting back. The office suddenly felt unbearably small. I realized Sarah wasn't Thomas's wife at all. She was evidence, a surviving victim forced to become part of the trap. "He made me play the role," she said. The quiet wife, the safe home, the normal family. Her breathing became uneven. Girls trusted me because I looked harmless. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. "Oh my God." Sarah nodded weakly. "He breaks you slowly first," she whispered. "That's why he acts gentle. Fear works better when it arrives gradually." I thought about every moment inside that house. The hallway touch, the couch, the keypad, the missing Wi-Fi. Every piece suddenly clicked together, like a nightmare puzzle finally revealing the full image. I started crying without realizing it. Not loud, just silent tears sliding down my face while my body shook uncontrollably. Sarah looked at me with something close to guilt. "He has already sold you," she whispered. The sentence hit harder than anything else. Not chosen, not targeted, sold, like an object. "The transport is coming tomorrow night," she continued. "That's why he kept saying you should rest." I felt physically ill, but I won't let him destroy you like he destroyed me. For the first time since arriving in that house, I saw something different in Sarah's eyes. Not fear, anger. Small, fragile, but alive. She stood up quickly and moved toward the filing cabinet near the wall. "There's more passports hidden behind these files," she whispered urgently. "And his spare car keys are taped under the kitchen drawer." My heartbeat exploded again. "You're helping me escape?" "I'm helping both of us." She pulled several passports free from behind the cabinet panel, then finally handed mine back to me completely. My fingers wrapped around it so tightly it hurt. For one brief second, hope returned. Real hope. Then we heard it, the sound of tires crunching slowly outside the house. Sarah's face drained of color instantly. "No," she whispered. A car door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps approached the front porch. Then, the front door unlocked. The sound of Thomas's footsteps moving through the hallway nearly stopped my heart completely. Slow, calm, unhurried, like he already owned everything inside that house. Sarah grabbed my wrist instantly. "Kitchen drawer," she whispered urgently. "The spare keys." Then the office doorknob started turning. Sarah shoved me backward toward the side exit just as Thomas stepped into the room. For the first time since I had met him, his face lost that warm, exhausted kindness. The mask disappeared completely. His eyes moved from me to the passports, to the open ledger on the desk, and then to Sarah. The silence that followed felt monstrous. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. Sarah stood between us. Actually stood there. Not shrinking, not trembling. Years of fear still lived in her eyes. But something stronger had finally surfaced beneath it. "No more," she whispered. Thomas laughed once. Cold, disbelieving. "You think you can survive without me?" "You were never keeping me alive," Sarah said. "You were burying me." His expression changed instantly. Pure rage flashed across his face as he lunged toward her. And that was my chance. I ran. My legs felt numb as I sprinted through the kitchen, ripping open drawers with shaking hands until I found the taped spare keys underneath, exactly where Sarah said they would be. Behind me, shouting exploded inside the house. I heard something crash. Sarah screamed. Then Thomas roared my name. I bolted through the front door into the freezing night air. Rain slapped against my face while I fumbled toward the car parked outside. My hands shook so violently I dropped the keys twice before unlocking it. Then Sarah appeared behind me barefoot in the rain. "Drive," she cried. I didn't think. I just drove. The tires screeched violently as we sped away from the house. Behind us, Thomas ran into the street screaming. But for the first time, he looked small, not powerful, desperate. Sarah was sobbing beside me so hard she could barely breathe. And suddenly I realized something. Neither of us were prisoners anymore. We reached the nearest police station less than 15 minutes later. I remember stumbling through the front doors, soaking wet, clutching the passports and burner phone against my chest while trying to explain everything through panicked tears. At first, the officers looked confused. Then they opened the ledger. Everything changed. Within an hour, police cars surrounded the quiet suburban neighborhood. That same ordinary house with flower pots and warm curtains. That same harmless-looking home where families waved at each other every morning. Except now, flashing blue lights painted the walls. Investigators carried out boxes of evidence, passports, burner phones, flight documents, and eventually, Thomas, handcuffed. The moment they walked him outside, he searched the crowd until his eyes landed on Sarah. For one terrifying second, I saw the old fear return to her face. Then the handcuffs clicked louder, and something inside her finally broke free. Not violently, quietly, like chains falling off after years of carrying them. Sarah started crying again beside me. But this time, they weren't the tears of someone trapped. They were the tears of someone surviving. Months later, I finally returned home. I still remember my mother collapsing into tears at the airport when she saw me alive. But the person I thought about most afterward was Sarah, not the frightened woman standing silently in kitchens. Not the fake wife. The survivor. The woman who finally chose to save someone instead of surrendering to fear. Thomas destroyed countless lives by hiding behind normalcy. That's the terrifying part. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles politely. Sometimes it cooks dinner. Sometimes it lives inside the house with the white picket fence. So trust your instincts. Guard your documents. And never ignore the feeling that something is wrong just because the danger looks ordinary. Because silence is where predators become powerful. And the moment victims stand together, their control begins to die.